The measures outlined in the bill send a clear message to both survivors and perpetrators. Domestic abuse should not and will not be tolerated. Domestic abuse is a heinous, horrific crime, not just because of the lasting damage it will leave its survivors, but because it strikes at the heart of what most of us hold so dear: our family, our home. The place where we are meant to feel safest, most loved and cherished, becomes a prison, a dark and frightening place, and in the very worst cases, a mental and physical torture chamber. Domestic abuse does not discriminate. It can occur in any relationship, gay or straight, in any family, behind any closed door. There is not a single community or socio-economic group that is unaffected by this crime. Its victims, its survivors, and its perpetrators are our friends, family members, neighbours, colleagues. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the last month, all our lives have been turned upside down by the coronavirus crisis. And COVID-19 has shone a dark light on domestic abuse. For some families, things are incredibly hard, trapped at home most, if not all of the day, creating the perfect storm that makes domestic abuse much more likely. And I welcome the government's recently launched domestic abuse campaign, You Are Not Alone, as part of its corona emergency response. Madam Deputy Speaker, when we talk about domestic abuse, we generally think about adults. However, children and young people are the hidden victims often of domestic abuse, simply considered witnesses and not directly affected. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Barnardo's for its help it has provided me when preparing for this speech, an outstanding charity amongst many, whose frontline and policy work helped thousands of children and young people experiencing domestic abuse, directly or indirectly. It is estimated that 1 in 5 children under 18 experience domestic abuse at some point in their childhood. And Barnardo's frontline staff, 3/4 of them, are working with children impacted by domestic abuse. But the damage and devastating impact witnessing domestic abuse can do to a child's development, their education attainment, and their long-term mental health can have a lasting effect on their life. It affects their ability to form happy, healthy relationships, and often leaving them trapped in a lifelong cycle of violence, either as a victim or even as an abuser themselves. Can you imagine the effects on a child who's had to endure watching and listening to a parent, often a mother, being screamed at, beaten, their every moment controlled by their abuser, day in and night out for many, many years? Growing up in a home which is meant to be your sanctuary, your safety net, where every morning you wake up and you dread going downstairs, not knowing whether a wrong word or look will start the abuse off again. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to pay tribute to a constituent of mine, the broadcaster and journalist Charlie Webster, who is a domestic abuse survivor herself. She has told me her story of the systematic, physical, emotional and coercive abuse that she suffered from the age of 7 at the hands of her stepfather. It is hard to believe that she is still alive when you hear her story. She told me last week that she is convinced that if her abuse occurred today during lockdown, she and her mum would not have survived. And it is Charlie's experience and Barnardo's policy work that has led me to conclude that a desperately needed amendment is required in this bill if we are going to help children through the trauma of growing up in a domestic abuse home. The government has added a welcome clause, section 53, putting a duty on public authorities to ensure support for victims who live in safe accommodation, usually a refuge. My fear is that as currently drafted, the bill risks creating a 2-tier system, helping those in supported accommodation, but not those still at home. And we already know that the majority of adults and child victims remain in their family home or elsewhere in the community. It is therefore vital that we fix this anomaly in the bill so that all victims of domestic abuse can expect and receive the support they need to recover from harm and move on with their lives. And I hope that ministers will accept that clause 53 should be amended. Domestic abuse doesn't discriminate, and neither should the law. I commend the second reading of the domestic abuse bill, and pray that when it finally does become law, that it will lead to better understanding of domestic abuse amongst the public and public agencies, and will ensure no vulnerable child or adult will be left to suffer. Thank you.
Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Madam